Good evening and welcome to the New York Symposium with Diane Sayre. I'm Diane Sayre. It is Friday, September 29th. We are in a rather amazing moment in world history. Really, I think an epochal change is occurring. The transatlantic Anglo-Dutch imperial system is over. It's thoroughly bankrupt. There is a new system emerging very much along the lines of what Lyndon LaRouche proposed decades ago with his International Development Bank, where nations are collaborating based on mutual respect for each other's sovereignty and also investing in joint infrastructure like the Belt and Road proposal of China. Now, that is not supported, to say the least, by those still in the old empire mode, including, unfortunately, our own government in the United States. And these people are prepared to risk even thermonuclear annihilation to prevent this. So I have today two very good friends, Scott Ritter, who is a former U.S. Marine intelligence officer, former UN weapons inspector who is quite on top of these matters strategically, and Carl Osgood, who writes for Executive Intelligence Review on various military matters. What I wanted to put forward today for discussion is that in the situation vis-a-vis Russia, Ukraine, which is just part of this global brawl unfolding, it's become clear to anyone willing to admit it that the so-called Ukrainian counteroffensive has failed. More people are beginning to admit what should have been obvious from the beginning, that Ukraine cannot and will not win this war, no matter how many weapons or whatever we send there. However, this is at great suffering to the Ukrainian people and their nation. Unfortunately, as was stated by the British and by certain members of the Biden administration, their position is that Russia cannot be allowed to win. Russia cannot win. And therefore, you have a situation that is continuing to escalate. Some people thought that when it became clear Ukraine didn't succeed in the counteroffensive, that they would just, blame Zelensky or just kind of quiet down about it and set their sights on provoking China over Taiwan. I think that is not happening. I think that, not that they're not targeting China, they are, but that this seems to be escalating in whatever way that they can. And therefore, this proposal, which was put out by 4 German figures, including Harold Kuyat, former retired general, calling for negotiations, I think indicates a shift, not that it's going to be implemented or agreed upon, but I can't even imagine living in Germany where your industry is collapsing by 50%. Seymour Hersh just wrote an article releasing a bombshell, which Ray McGovern was asking about some time ago, which was when Olaf Scholz was standing next to Joe Biden, February 7th, 2022, at that White House press conference. Had Biden told Scholz that the United States was planning to blow up the Nord Stream pipelines, Hersh says that Scholz was informed about this. And what are the implications of that? So against this background, the fact that you have this proposal where they unfortunately begin, but I think given that it's Germany, I'm not sure they could have said otherwise, they call it the Russian War of Aggression on February 24th, but they admit that Ukraine is not going to win. They say that you have to exercise reason, implying that what's going on is unreasonable. They say there is a real danger of a nuclear war limited to the European continent, which would not be limited, I don't think. And then they propose various measures: ceasefire, stopping supply of weapons, peacekeepers. If they can't get an agreement over the 4 oblasts which had referenda to join the Russian Federation, that they should do that again in a couple of years, etc. It's a very thorough document. And as I said, I think the significance is perhaps indicating a shift, that some people are saying we better stop pushing this line that Ukraine is winning. Now, that doesn't seem to be happening in the United States. I'm afraid that advisors to Biden, or Biden himself, if he's still capable of thinking, might believe somehow his reelection is connected to defeating Russia. So I don't know where that leads, but Scott, I'd like to, and let me just say, participation in the SARE for Senate Symposium doesn't constitute endorsement of my candidacy. I don't always agree with everything expressed by my guests. I believe in the right to have disagreement in order to come to perhaps a clearer understanding of the strategic situation. So with that, I'd like to introduce you, Scott, and get your thoughts on the current situation. Does this represent any kind of shift in Germany? And how dangerous is this period going into the U.S. elections?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me here. The German proposal would have been very useful, say back in April, May of 2022. In the aftermath of the attempts by Russia to get Ukraine to agree to a ceasefire and to bring about a termination of this conflict. The proposal, which was quite reasonable, that Russia and Ukraine had agreed to, was nixed, of course, by Boris Johnson visiting. Boris Johnson, the former Prime Minister of England, visited Kiev and told President of Ukraine, Zelensky, under no certain, there was no confusion that to buy into this agreement with Russia would be the end of Ukraine's NATO aspirations, that the West would abandon Ukraine. And so Zelensky began to put down, failed to meet on 1 April in Istanbul to finalize this, and began to put more and more unrealistic requirements for conflict termination down, until what we get today is this ridiculous 10-point plan that Zelensky puts out that requires Russia to return to its 1991 borders, to pay reparations, and to surrender its leadership to the International Criminal Court for prosecution as war criminals. Now, that's the kind of terms you put down when you win a war. It's called unconditional surrender. But Ukraine is not winning the war. They're not even close to winning the war. Nobody but somebody who is totally self-delusional could articulate that Ukraine is even doing well in this conflict. They're facing strategic defeat, absolute complete collapse of their military capabilities, their economic potential, and the current political regime is likewise failing. The German proposal is unrealistic in every aspect. I agree with you that it does represent a shift from Europe's previous posture, at least publicly declared, that they support Ukraine, that it's Ukraine will be the one to determine the timing and the conditions of conflict termination. But Zelensky has doubled down on stupid, as I like to blithely say, by continuing with 10 point. He last articulated this yesterday with Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General of NATO, in Kiev, together with the defense ministers of the United Kingdom and France. And all three said that it is the Ukrainian 10-point peace plan that NATO is supporting. And what NATO just did in doing that is condemn Ukraine to total, utter destruction. And I don't mean the kind of destruction that's taking place right now. At the same time that this meeting was taking place, the General Shoigu, the Minister of Defense of Russia, indicated that the special military operation would be extended to 2025. At the same time, British intelligence, which has sometimes had some useful insights into Russian strategic thinking, said that Russia is preparing to go on the offensive, and it's an offensive that will result in the seizure of 5 more territories, in addition to the 4 that have been seized. and that Russia is in the process of assembling a 1 million man army to accomplish this. What's realistic about this is I have always said that, when people say, well, Russia's going to take Kharkov, Russia's going to take Odessa, I said, not with the army it currently has. Because as capable as the Russian army is, there are limits to what you can do with limited manpower. But in looking at, the Russian mobilization as it's taken place, Russia has already mobilized just under 1 million men for this special military operation. So the 1 million man army is in place. And Russia has said that if Ukraine insists on continuing this conflict, that there will be a price to be paid. So this war will not end on negotiation that's brought together by any well-meaning Germans. The time for negotiation is past. If this war is to end, it'll end in a manner that reflects what occurred in Tokyo Bay on September 2nd, 1945, the unconditional surrender of Ukraine to Russia. And Russia is basically indicating that it's in no rush to end this war, that it's comfortable where the war is. They will kill Ukrainians as long as Ukrainians want to be killed. They're not going to do anything precipitous that causes Russia to suffer unnecessary casualties. They're seeking the total annihilation of the Ukrainian army. That is what demilitarization now means. It used to mean something different. Now there will be no Ukrainian military surviving this conflict. And it also means, when they speak of denazification, it is the total elimination of the Zelensky government and all political parties that have been tainted by the ideology of Stepan Bandera. And if Russia's talking about taking 5 new territories, the 5 are obvious. You start with Odessa, Mykolaiv, Dnipropetrovsk, Kharkov, and Sumy. These are all Russian-dominated regions that, together with the 4 that have already been captured and taken over by Russia, constitute what is historically known as Novorossiya, New Russia. This is the end of Ukraine, and there's no going back. Russia will not negotiate. Russia has no trusted interlocutors from the Western side. Who are they to trust? The Germans, after what Angela Merkel did to them? They to trust the French after Francois Hollande? Are they to trust the Americans, who have never told the truth? Who can they trust? They can't trust the Ukrainians, who have lied, backtracked on everything. There's no one in the West that Russia trusts, therefore Russia will trust no one but themselves. So this war will go on. The Russian victory will be total. And the best chance Ukraine has for any concept of survival is the total collapse of the Ukrainian military soon, leading to the total political collapse of the Zelensky regime and an intervention by whatever Ukrainian regime that comes afterwards to fall on their knees and beg the Russians not to follow through with their plan, to accept unconditional terms of surrender that allow Ukraine to retain the 5 territories Russia is currently planning on taking away from them. But this will not be pretty for Ukraine. This will not be pretty for the West. Now, what is the West going to do about this? Nothing. The West can do nothing. The West has nothing to do anything with. A nuclear conflict will not happen on its own volition. There will have to be some sort of precipitating event. Normally, one would think that would be force-on-force conventional confrontation between NATO and Russia. The Russian military today is so overwhelmingly powerful that no NATO force, no American force, no combination of American and NATO forces can survive on a battlefield against the Russians for more than 2 weeks. Therefore, nobody will try this because it's suicidal from the start. NATO is an empty suit, a paper tiger. They have nothing. The economies that they need to rebuild NATO are failing. The German economy is collapsing, deindustrializing before our very eyes. Same thing with the French. The British are pathetic. As I've said long before, when you take the totality of the British Army and put them in a large soccer stadium, you'll have 30 to 40,000 unsold seats. I think that number is going to become even bigger because the British Army, instead of growing, is shrinking. This is the reality of NATO. They have no budget, they have no armies, they have no capabilities. Russia, on the other hand, has expanded their active duty force from 900,000 to 1.5 million. This does not include the forces earmarked specifically for the special military operation. That means 1.5 does not include the 300,000 partially mobilized, does not include the 300,000 volunteers, does not include what's happening as we speak. Putin is meeting with Wagner as we speak to reinsert Wagner. 20 to 30,000 combat-hardened troops will be reinserted into the special military operation. And Wagner is not a defensive force. Wagner is an exclusively offensive force. To reinsert Wagner into the special military operation zone of operations means that Russia will be going over on the offensive very soon. This is the reality. No one's going to buy into. It takes two to tango. It doesn't matter how well-meaning these Germans are. It doesn't matter that they are moving away from the hardline position. Europe doesn't get a vote anymore. They don't have a say. They don't matter. They don't count. They did it to themselves. Russia and Russia alone will determine the time and the means by which this conflict ends. And right now it appears that Russia has made a decision that Ukraine will cease to exist as a modern nation state, that whatever emerges from this conflict will look nothing like the Ukraine that went into this conflict. And that's a harsh reality, but it is the reality.
Well, that's pretty stark. I have a bunch of thoughts, but I'm going to let Carl say what he has, and then I want to have a few things I'd like to add and get your thoughts on. Carl?
Well, yeah, it is a very stark picture, and I think much of it, I agree with much of what you say, Scott, but I also agree with Helga when she says that there is no alternative to peace. The alternative is the end of humanity, and that's something that we can't tolerate. And I think really the picture that you described of NATO really leaves. A friend of mine commented to me yesterday that the leadership of the West, especially the Biden administration, these guys have no connection to reality. They throw stuff out there. They have no understanding of what they're doing, what the consequences of what they're doing will be, and they keep escalating. And then we've all been watching this over the last year and a half. First, there was the Javelin missiles, then there was the M777 artillery, and then there was, I can't even remember all the different weapons we've thrown in there. Now there's going to be the M1 tanks, the F-16s, we have the Storm Shadow missiles. All of these things were thrown in as if they were going to turn the tide of the war. And then, of course, that hasn't happened. So what follows next? At what point do they get to where they think that the only option they have left is nuclear weapons? Because we're talking about a system that's dying, but is determined to take everything with it if it's not going to exist anymore. I mean, it's a collapsing empire, and this is how they behave. So I think the danger there is very real, but we have to think about how do you actually make a revolution? And I don't pretend to fully understand how that works, but I know that it's happened. One image that I've had in front of me over the last few hours actually is the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. On October 9th, a month before it happened, nobody thought that the wall was going to fall. The leader of East Germany, the Erich Honecker, had just delivered a speech on the 40th anniversary of the founding of the East German Communist Party, which he said would rule for another 40 years. And a month later, it was all over. The wall had fallen. People were streaming across it. And the East German regime was on the way to coming to an end. And that did happen. And that's the kind of, we need to create the conditions for that to happen again. Diane is in the middle of that. The LaRouche movement is in the middle of that. But that's what we have to do in order to create the conditions for there to be peace, because the alternative is simply not acceptable.
Scott, go ahead. I'm sure you have thoughts.
No, I mean, in theory, look, I agree 100% that the best thing in the world for everybody is peace. But I've said something in the past that got me in trouble. I don't care because I strongly believe in it. Diane, you talked about your dog. I have 3 right here. Love them to death. Take them to dog parks. Took them today in the rain because I like taking them to dog park. They like being at the dog park. They like being with other dogs, and they like other dog owners because dog owners are pretty cool people. But and I would never do any harm to a dog at all, unless a rabid dog was let loose on my street. There's a rabid dog on the street threatening the other dogs, threatening my neighbors, threatening my family. I will kill that dog. I will kill it without remorse. I will kill it rapidly. I will terminate the threat. This is the fact. When a threat exists, it must be terminated. We can talk about peace, but when NATO behaves the way it has, when they are pushing Ukraine into this suicidal stance, the only alternative for Russia because there can be no compromise. This is an existential struggle for Russia. It's not an existential struggle for the West, by the way. For the United States to say, if it's not the rules-based international order, we go away, I say wrong, because the United States existed before the rules-based international order. The rules-based international order is an artificiality created at a unique time in world history, the post-World War II era. That era is gone. The rules-based international order is nothing. It stands for nothing. It can go away and the world will be a better place for it. America will still exist. So will Europe. This is all artificial talk that we talk about. When we talk about Russia, though, we are actually trying to destroy Russia, to bring Russia down physically, to dismember Russia. It is existential. And that means that Russia cannot stop halfway. And any peace settlement that requires Russia to make a compromise only strengthens NATO. That's what people need to understand. It only strengthens the rules-based international order. Because this is an all or nothing with Russia, it has to win all, everything. And Russia's not asking for unreasonable thing, because all Russia wants, when they say all, is for Russian survival. They just want Russia to be able to survive without the threat of other nations trying to use Ukraine as a tool to destroy Russia. I feel sorry for the Ukrainians. They're sort of stuck in the middle of this. But it's their own fault. This didn't have to be this way. But when we talk about peace, it can't be peace in quotations. It has to be genuine peace. And anything that requires Russia to compromise at all on the issue of Ukraine, on the issue of NATO, on any issue pertaining to the existential survival of Russia is unacceptable. So this is one of those cases where I say, in order to get us back to where we can have all our puppy dogs in the park playing, I got to go out with a rifle and kill some bad rabid dogs. I have to kill them. Can't take them to the vet. They can't be cured. They must die. And we are at the situation, the status right now, where the Zelensky regime is a rabid dog. It is an absolute rabid dog. It cannot be reasoned with. It has allowed itself to be captured by Banderist ideology. You can't cure that. The only cure is eradication. And that's where we're at. And this is why I'm basically saying that the fastest path to peace is total Russian victory. And I know that's difficult for people who promote peace to accept, but I just think it's the reality. I, too, would like a war to end today. But the war can't end today if the cancer of Banderist Ukraine continues to exist. This is a cancer, and it must be eliminated.
Well, I would actually describe this Zelensky pro-Nazi regime as a robot, which is controlled by a criminal enterprise, namely this, whatever you want to call it, Anglo-Dutch monstrosity that has taken over the United States, particularly since the assassination of Kennedy, the UK, what NATO represents. And therefore, I do think that a revolutionary change would allow the geometry to change and an exit possible, but only under the conditions that you get a change. And I think there are some questions. Is NATO really going to remain unified? That's one question. There's a lot of reason for nations to not want to be part of this alliance. I mean, I don't know if you have to ask, what's the cost of having the United States as your ally? You get your pipelines blown up, you get your trade shut down, you get your industry moved out of the country, you get to be under the Five Eyes spying on everything that you do. Does everyone really want to be part of that? It also seems to me that one of the reasons why Russia has not unleashed what it clearly is capable of doing thus far is because we have elections in the United States in November of 2024. And I know many people in the world have expressed at different Schiller Institute conferences in different ways the necessity of not having the Biden administration or any relic of that back in the White House. And I do think that Americans have to reflect on the fact you have two leading candidates who both have said they would end this war in each party. You have Donald Trump, who said that, who's facing 91 indictments. And every time anything happens, a new indictment pops up. And then you have Robert Kennedy Jr., who has armed gunmen showing up at his events, who, as far as I know, has still been denied Secret Service protection by the Biden administration. So obviously there is an intense effort underway to prevent a shift in the presidency of the United States. My position is, if we don't shift the dynamic of the United States, if we don't return to a Republican form of government where we actually have free and fair elections and honest debate, that a republic is finished, and if this, whatever you want to call it, represented with Biden's face on it, but it might have another face by then, ends up back in the White House, I think we actually are finished. I think there would be no way of avoiding a nuclear war at that point. The other thing is the dynamic of the global South, which Helga again expressed today, that given that there is such a revolt, as you know, Argentina, Brazil, many nations are refusing to send weapons and ammunition to NATO. They don't want to aid in this conflict. Is there a shift that might occur where some group of nations that people normally don't think about as wielding any power can act in concert to get us off this collision course?
Is that to me or to Carl?
That's to both of you.
Go ahead, Carl.
Okay, well, I would add to that. I would just review the. You talked about, Diane. You mentioned the lack of unity in NATO. Let's talk about that for a minute, because we had this scandal in Canada where they presented a Nazi veteran of the Galician SS division, which committed massacres against Poles and Jews in 1943. This guy was a member of that unit at that time, getting 2 standing ovations in the Canadian Parliament. The Poland government is now talking about extraditing this Nazi. This is really blowing up in the face of the Canadians, who have been, of course, one of the most vigorous supporters of the Kiev regime outside of the US, and facilitated in part by the fact that the British imported thousands of Ukrainian SS veterans to Canada after World War II to sort of protect them from prosecution and to use them, right? These networks. So, but Poland has already also been in a conflict with Ukraine itself over the matter of grain, because when the Turkish mediated grain deal collapsed, Ukraine was looking to export grain through Eastern Europe. And there was a great fear, not only in Poland, but I think Slovakia, Hungary, and maybe 1 or 2 other countries, that this grain would end up on the local markets instead of being shipped further to the West. And the Poles banned the shipping of grain. And now this is a real issue of disagreement between Warsaw and Kiev. And so much so that the Polish prime minister actually announced that Poland would no longer ship Polish arms to Ukraine. They're not stopping the flow of other Western arms through Poland to Ukraine, but they are not going to ship any more of their own arms to Ukraine. So that has created more tensions. There's elections underway that are coming up in both Poland and Slovakia. Slovakia, the leading opposition candidate, Robert Fico, is considered to be more friendly towards Russia than the current government. In the Czech Republic, you've had massive demonstrations against NATO, and there's more of this kind of stuff going on. So the picture of a unified NATO simply isn't there, despite the statements to that effect. So that's why I think one of the things that we should look at in terms of where things are going is that that there is a growing opposition all over the West to the behavior. And I think what Diane already pointed out about the situation in the U.S. is relevant to all of that. So I think I just want to look at the picture of the actual picture of what's going on here.
What I would do is counter with the picture of what's going on in Russia. Mm-hmm. Because while I agree with you that NATO is fracturing, that Europe is collapsing, Russia is coalescing. The Russian people have rallied around their president and this war to a degree that the West hasn't quite caught on to. We continue to talk about the 700,000 military men, Russian men who fled Russia at the time of the partial mobilization. Nobody comments on the fact that to a person, these 700,000 were all supporters of Navalny, the opposition, men who were never going to serve anyways. Most of these men had never served in the military, therefore weren't going to be subjected to mobilization. They fled for political reasons to make a political statement. They brought no harm to Russia whatever. Actually, they strengthened Russia by allowing this opposition to flee. They purified Russia to some extent. And that's how the Russians view it, as a purification. Russia is stronger now, having lost the poison of the West. Russians, by and large, were against this conflict when it started because there is no inherent animosity between Russians and Ukraine. And many Russians hadn't reflected more than a superficial manner about the threat of the right sector of Sloboda, the Banderists. It took the West to intervene and turn this conflict from a Russian-Ukrainian conflict to a conflict between Russia and the collective West for the Russians to wake up. Today, the Russians are quite sure what's at stake here. They are fighting a war of existential survival against the collective West that includes a Ukraine that has self-identified as the progeny of Nazi Germany, the successor to the very ideology that 27 million Soviet citizens gave their lives for to defeat. And I was there during Victory Day. I was there in the lead up to Victory Day, after Victory Day. And I will tell you right now that this is as real as it gets to them. I can sit here and talk about what it means to have 27 million pairs of eyeballs staring down you. They feel it in their soul every day they walk. When I walked the streets of St. Petersburg, I saw buildings, and what I was told is that every one of those stones is soaked in the blood of the suffering of the Russian people at the hands of Nazi Germany. They will never forget. They may forgive, but they will never forget. And they are now unified in this. And so now that they are unified in this, there is a momentum that comes with this. It cannot be stopped. This is what the West needs to understand. They missed their opportunity. There was a chance for this war to end on equitable terms. If you look at what Russia had put on the table leading up to the 1 April signing ceremony in Istanbul, it was the most reasonable thing in the world. Some people, including myself, would say it was too reasonable. Why are you doing it? Because Russia was looking for peace. Russia has always been the responsible party and the party capable of making the compromises necessary to achieve an equitable outcome, but no more. There will never be a compromise. This is my belief after being to Russia. The Russian people are committed. There is a momentum here, a emotional momentum that this war must be brought to its conclusion. And the conclusion must be the defeat of not only Nazi Ukraine, but the collective West. And the Russian government has acted on this by mobilizing Russia in a very smart manner. It hasn't been precipitous. There has been no mass mobilization. It has been a slow and steady buildup. Defense industry now has been expanded. They are in full wartime mode without being at war, without impacting society, working triple shifts, quadruple shifts. They've opened up new lines. Russia will not hit the pause button for anybody. There will be no pause. Russia has the momentum going. They are accruing the forces. There might have been a time when Russia said, oh, yes, we need to be aware of the November 2024 elections in the United States. It is the end of September 2023. Russia will not pause for more than a year to allow an American election to dictate the outcome of this conflict in Ukraine. The war will be over before these elections take place. Russia doesn't care about American elections. They don't care about anything. As I said, the mood there is they are done with the West. They just don't care. Why do you think Vladimir Putin made good with Kim Jong-un? Turning upside down decades of Russian diplomatic practice when it came to nuclear nonproliferation. Why did he do that? Because they just don't care about the West anymore. They don't care about anything about the West. The West doesn't matter. The West can get up and say whatever they want. Germany could come up with peace agreements. Russia has tuned them out because they have proven to be the most irresponsible of partners when it comes to seeking peace. Russia is now committed to a victory that they say will be on the scope and scale of the victory they got against Nazi Germany in 1945. And this isn't rhetoric. The nation is mobilized for this. So it can't be stopped. This is a force for conflict termination that cannot be stopped. And nobody in the West can stop it, primarily because the West has totally alienated itself from Russia. How can you have any impact on a nation that you have sanctioned? How can Europe expect Russia to listen to anything they say when they say we won't let a Russian registered automobile across the border with shampoo in it? This is the level of ridiculousness that this has come down to. The West has made itself so totally, irreversibly irrelevant to Russia. And so Russia has mobilized. They have mobilized. It's not that they will mobilize. It's not that they have the potential of mobilizing. They have mobilized. And now that they have mobilized, this momentum will carry forward and it can't be stopped, no matter what.
Let me ask this. Why are they then saying that their special military operation is going to go through 2025?
That's how long it's going to take to capture 5 territories from Ukraine. Russia is not going to sacrifice World War II style casualties. They are going to go forward in a very methodical manner. They are going to press, they are going to press, they are going to press, and they are going to win.
Now, let me ask you this. If you were Secretary of State right now and were able to, and we had a president who was sane, which is hard to imagine in the United States, what do you think American policy should be immediately now if we were able to control that?
I mean, I spoke of this if I were the president or Secretary of State, which one?
Well, Secretary of State, but yeah, Secretary of State.
Okay, let's say RFK Jr.'s president.
Okay.
Scott, make peace. What would I do? I would get on an airplane and I would immediately fly to Pyongyang. And I would sit down with Kim Jong-un. And I would say, boss, it's over. And what I mean by over, we have to stop this. We need peace.
Uh-oh. Wait, stop.
It is.
Okay, so go ahead, Scott, where you are Secretary of State.
I've been appointed Secretary of State by newly installed President RFK Jr., and I've been tasked with bringing peace to the world. I start off, look, I'll just tell you what my operating premise is. I can't talk about potential, I have to show results. If I'm going to sit down with Xi Jinping, if I'm going to sit down with Vladimir Putin or Lavrov, I can't come in and speak of hypotheticals. There will have to be actual belts on the wall, meaning I have to have done something. So the first stop is North Korea, and to talk about how do we get North Korea on the path of denuclearization. And the first thing I'll say is that denuclearization is not a prerequisite to anything we're about to do. We accept you as a nuclear power. We would like you not to be a nuclear power. We would like you to go the South African route and voluntarily get rid of nuclear weapons. But that's a long-term objective. We accept the reality of your nuclear power. What we want to do is learn how to live in peace with you, peaceful coexistence. How do we bring an end to the conflict to the Korean Peninsula? How do we integrate you more fully into the global economy and into the world of nations in good standing with the United Nations Charter? I would propose immediate lifting of sanctions unconditionally. So again, it's over. I would just say it's over. The day of pressure on you is finished. The now question is, how do we bring you back in? And then I would stop off in South Korea and I'd stop off in Tokyo and say, it's done. You can whine about it all you want, but it's done. What I would advise you to do is stop, figure out how to spend money on a war that isn't going to happen now, because I just stopped the war, and start worrying about how you're going to convert to a peacetime economy that fully integrates the potential of North Korea. That's my assignment to you. Off to Beijing. But before I go to Beijing, I stop off in Taiwan. I know the Chinese are going to be very unhappy about this, but I don't care. Because I'm going to tell the Taiwanese it's over. One China policy means one China policy. You are going to integrate with China. We are not going to provide you with any more weapons, no more munitions, nothing. The military aspect of this is finished. And then I'd fly to Beijing and say, you see what I just did there? I'm serious about this. We need to make good. Okay, I know we got some economic difficulties. That's why we have a trade guy over here. I'm not the trade guy. I'll bring the trade guy in. You guys work it out. I'm the peace guy. There will be no war in Taiwan over Taiwan. That's what I'm here to tell you. There will be no war over Taiwan. How do we begin get you and Taiwan to reunify in a way that protects the autonomy of Taiwan, as you said you always wanted? You wanted, two systems, one government. Let's talk Turkey about that. Oh, I got to run. See you in a minute. I fly off to Ukraine, and I stop off in Kiev, and I shake whoever's in charge's hand, and I say, tomorrow it's over. We don't send you any more weapons. It's done. My advice to you is to call your military right now and basically throw the white flag up and tell the Russians, no more shooting. We're not going to shoot. No, it's not a formal ceasefire. You just stop shooting. Tell the Russians we're done shooting for now. Hey, that's up to you to communicate to them, but we're done. I'm just telling you right now, no more weapons. Then I fly to Brussels, and I say, NATO, two things. One, we're done in Ukraine. It's finished. Two, this organization has to go away. It's not going to go away tonight, not tomorrow, but we are done as a military alliance. We are now a political alliance looking on how to build a new European security framework with an emphasis on European security framework. We're the United States of America. We will always be here for you. If the time ever comes when you need us, we're coming across as we have done before. I'd like to make sure that we never again have that time. I want to make sure that Europe is peaceful and prosperous and that you don't have enemies, because you don't have enemies. So you work it out, Brussels. We'll be back. I got some assistant secretaries of state who are going to fly over and talk to you on this one. Then I fly to Moscow and I sit down with the Russians and I say, I don't BS. I don't fool around. I'm not about theory. I'm about reality. All right. I just did all this without even talking to you because I'm going to do it anyways. You can decide, do you want to work with me or do you want to work against me? Okay. I've done nothing that runs counter to what you stand for. You claim to be for about peace. I just stopped the conflict in Ukraine. It's over. Now we got to figure out how to repair this. I already told NATO they're going away, so Ukraine will never be part of a NATO because NATO won't exist anymore. You don't have to worry about the 1997 boundaries because NATO is going away. The question is, what replaces it? Are you serious about respecting legitimate European security, legitimate European spheres of influence, spheres of security? You want us to respect yours. Will you respect ours? Let's sit down and talk Turkey. How do we define this? Oh, and by the way, nuclear weapons, they're really, really bad. We need to get rid of them. All right, so now I've de-emphasized North Korea's nuclear weapons. I've talked to China about peace, getting rid of NATO. That means, yeah, I think next week those 100 B-61 bombs are going home. And we're going to start, talking to the French and the British about maybe getting your submarines back to port. And we're going to do this without you. We're just going to do it because it makes the world a safer place to live. I'd like to work with you to go further, get arms control back on the table, to bring about peace. Everything I just did doesn't cost a penny. The cost of what I just did was the cost of an airline ticket. That's it. And now I've gone home and I've literally just saved American taxpayers billions of dollars over the course of years. And I've changed the world order. And guess what? Guess who's the most important nation in the world right now? The United States of America. Everybody's talking about America because nothing I just got involved in can happen without us. And it's not about surrendering, it's about leading, about leadership. People will now be looking to us saying, hey, we got a problem. Hey, America. Hey, Bobby Jr., buddy, send that peacemaker over here. We need some help with peace. We're stronger because of it. We're the most important nation in the world. We matter more than anybody. And then we can build upon that goodwill to repair economic relationships. I'm not talking about old school rules-based international order. I'm talking about the way it should be. Equals, sitting down at a table saying, how do we do this? How do we do this so it's mutually beneficial? And then I go into retirement because I've done my job, and now all the experts have to come in and fix it. But the point is, this making peace is literally the easiest thing in the world. All you have to do is want it. Nothing I just outlaid is impossible. It's all going to happen anyways. I already said North Korea, they don't care about us anymore. We are so irrelevant to them now. We can make ourselves relevant, becoming the key to peace. China and Taiwan. China doesn't care about us anymore because we've made ourselves irrelevant. By doing this, I made America the most relevant, the most important part of the Chinese-Taiwanese problem set. By turning to Europe and saying you're getting rid of your decades-long addiction to NATO, and you're going to have to learn how to fly on your own, little bird. Okay, you've been in the nest too long. Mama bird's kicking you out. Time to flap your wings and fly. To get Europe to talk about European security, what's important for Europe. Because if Europe's healthy, then America's healthy. But right now, we've turned Europe into this sick, diseased entity where everything's collapsing. And while it make us feel good economically to sell them gas at 5 times market value, it doesn't make us stronger. We become stronger when we have a relevant position to play in the world. And the most relevant position to play in the world for the United States today is as peacemaker. And why? Because the distinction between peacemaker and war maker is so huge, it actually magnifies the importance of America, because we are, as we speak, the #1 problem in the world today. Everywhere, America is the problem. So if we make America the solution, the gap between the two means that the difference is huge, or to quote Donald Trump, huge. But the point is, we can do this. We can do this. It doesn't cost us anything. And what we get from it is everything. Or we can just continue doing what we're doing, and we're going to fail, collapse, and the world will make us irrelevant. And hopefully the world will survive, but we won't. Whatever's left of America, and I'm not talking about nuclear war, I'm just talking about the total decay of our society.
Right. No,
as we speak.
That's clear. Carl, that was a really fun tour, Scott. Thank you for that.
Scott, you just described a paradigm shift, a real revolution away from the sole superpower ideology and towards closer to what America's original mission actually was.
Yeah. And
that's what we need to organize. I also wanted to comment on the points you made about Russian unity. I think what you said there is extremely important for Americans and for people in the West generally to understand, because you may know this better than I, that Western corporate media tends to poo-poo this, accuse Putin. I've seen articles that have accused Putin of creating an ideology around World War II and using it for his own political purposes. They just dismiss it. But really Americans don't understand it. We weren't subjected to the same kind of thing during World War II. But it's extremely important for Americans to understand that how the Russians see the world. And I actually think you're doing a very important job of doing that. So I would certainly encourage you to keep it up. And I think that will be helpful towards creating the political revolution, which you also just described, that we really need. Because what's lacking in American thinking is being able to see the world through the eyes of others. You talked about how the Russians see the world. How do Africans see the world? How do the Chinese see the world, right? How do they see the world in Thailand or in Argentina, which is being crushed by the IMF, right? We really need to be able to do that, and Americans really don't have a sense of that. What you're doing in terms of helping us see how the Russians see the world, I think, is really crucial and would be very helpful and necessary in creating the revolution that we need to create.
Yeah, so I think we should wrap up. I would like to propose that perhaps we should begin a denazification program in the United States.
Yes,
I think the Kennedy's repeated references to his uncle and his father and the role, the Dulles brothers, perhaps in those assassinations or not, but certainly in the Nazi pipeline, into the United States even before World War II ended is something that we would do well to get to the bottom of. Because I agree, Scott, what you just said is completely American. John Quincy Adams would agree with you wholeheartedly, as would Lyndon LaRouche, another presidential figure who was thrown in prison, silenced, vilified, attempted to be made irrelevant, but not. And I think that we, the American people, still have much more power than we are using. And if this fails, we really have no one to blame but ourselves. So I want to thank
What I
everyone.
might propose, and just in that, I agree in the denazification, but here's a practical step. Let's sit down with Ukrainian historians, and let's pick 4 figures from Ukrainian history that could be seen as the ideal for defining the Ukrainian nation. Because I do believe there is a Ukrainian nation. I believe that this nation deserves to exist. And then I think we should hire an artist to make these 4 sculptures. And then I'd come up with a different slogan for Ukraine, one that matches, a positive aspect of their history. And I would hire an artist to be prepared to alter a monument with this slogan. And then I would gather everybody I could outside of a Ukrainian youth camp in Ellenville, New York, and surround it and say, we want to replace your statues. We want you to redefine Ukrainian nationalism. We want you to start promoting something that's positive. We want you to abandon the teachings of Stepan Bandera. We want you to abandon the ideology of modern day Nazism. We want you to be proponents of peace, and then see if we can get them to denazify peacefully by giving them an alternative. But because right now there's this heroes monument that they have these 4 statues to these despicable people, these mass murderers, these Nazis, and they allow children to come in and get indoctrinated every year to this. I just saw the photographs of their 2 classes this summer. The kids wearing the brown uniforms of the stormtroopers, holding the portrait of Stepan Bandera, bearing the banners that have Nazi symbology on them. This is in the United States of America. If we had the KKK running white youth camps down south, putting out hatred towards Black Americans and publishing their photographs, I bet people would be upset about that. I bet people would be rallying against that. If the KKK had a monument where they put the busts of the 4 most vile racists in American history, and celebrated them in their life, we would be upset about that. We would demonstrate against it. But right here in Ellenville, New York, they have the busts of the 4 most vile Ukrainians imaginable, men who are responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people. They're celebrated every year. We have to stop this celebration. That's denazification here at home in America.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you both very much. I would urge everyone who's watched this to please sign up at sayerforsenate.com and get on my email list and work with my campaign and even donate. There will be also more actions of the Schiller Institute, international conferences, and demonstrations and rallies. And I would encourage everybody to make your views known among the Congress. The fact that Zelensky did not get invited to the House of Representatives this time, I thought was useful, but it's not enough. We need a major shift right away. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.